Hello. Hello. Alice is ready to go. I'd just like to welcome Chris here this evening for the launch of his book, which is a terrific achievement, and there's some great stories. I've read it about growing up and living on the island. I've walked, I've climbed Knockaveen, I've walked the Green Road, I've climbed Knockmore, so there are some beautiful places out there which I've thoroughly enjoyed. I have a rib, and in recent years I've experienced the fog out there. When the fog comes down and how difficult it is to get in there. And I'd just like to hand you over to Chris to say a few words and thank him for coming again today to launch his book.
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to Michael and Archie, John and Clonade, of course, for giving us the room for the evening, for this special event. And you know, when I started writing this little chapter of life, what life was like on the island over the last 80 years, the last thing I ever thought of was having a launch of the book here in Westport. It was beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't ever think of it. But as I progressed, of course, through it, the whole story of Clare Island from when I was 5 years of age started to spring up in my mind and in the brain, and for some extraordinary reason. The brain is an extraordinary part of the human anatomy, really. It's the way it works, because I could remember all these things that happened in this book clearly from 4 or 5 years of age, and I couldn't remember where I was born with the phone out of my bloody hand 5 minutes ago. And I suppose the same for everybody, but that was it anyway. And it was a labour of love, literally, because when I stepped back from the hotel and from the boating activity, I found myself in a vacuum that was just a bit hard to take, because working as one does pretty hard through their life, and you suddenly find yourself sitting on your backside and with nothing to do. It's not a nice feeling. So I decided that I'd start with the biro in the hand, of course, putting little notes together, and that's where this document, if you want to call it that, came to fruition. But it's only a brief, really, as I mentioned. It's a brief story, because as you start writing something like this, the springwell of memories just keeps bubbling into your brain, and it could be double the size, or there could be a second book. But you know, as far as I was concerned, it was an easement of necessity to get it finished with, and I only finished it there about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and sent it to the printer. And I was lucky enough to be in touch with a company in Kerry, who I googled actually on the internet to see if they were if they'd be interested in looking at it. Number one, which they were, is a lady by the name of Bridget McLoughlin, who was she's an editor, of course, and she's a book writer and book. She's into book writing and all that sort of stuff. And I said, would you be interested in reading it? And she said, certainly send it on. And it was her actually that pushed me through. And there'd been an hourly telephone conversation with us for the last couple of months about the whole thing, and she compiled. I sent her the photographs, and she put the whole package together, and she did a nice job on the cover, and it looks pretty good. So there's a lot of little stories in it, of course. There's a lot of stories about the island, of course, and all the great characters that I grew up with in Clare Island in those years, which are sadly all gone now. And they were like Westport, and Westport to me, of course, in the early years of my life was, I used to come out to Westport on holidays when I was 7 or 8 years of my life, and I used to go along with my uncle at the time through his various contracts in his big V8 car at the time, which I remember and he'd tell me, jump into the back there, you know. And I'll always remember one event with him, and I didn't mention it in the book, but we were going out to some bridge that he was contracting on, working on at a time, and a big flock of geese were in front of the road, and he drove through the bloody geese, and a few of them ended up under the car, and he looked around and he said, go out there and throw them into the bush. He said, go out there and throw them into the bush. And he brought them home, and he gave them to the wife. Of course, he said, pluck them in, and we'll have them for the dinner cups. This is one of these are lovely stories, you know, that you pick up from your youth that stays with you. And these guys that I grew up with on Clare Island were similar guys. They were a character of wit and everything like that, and it was a joy to work with them and to learn from them, as I did, the boating aspect of life and all that. But there's other little, there's a lot of other little stories in it that's quite nice. I'll tell you a little story from it about two great friends from who came to Westport from America. Two great characters. There lived down at the quay in the Asgard, and Tad Minish and John Stevens. There's a few people here that remember Tad and John, and they pitched their anchors, let me put it that way, in Westport. They fell in love with the town, and they opened up the Asgard pub at the time, and we used to spend nights down there with all the Westport lads drinking, and there were some stories to tell from that lovely little place. It's still there, of course, but the two lads are gone. But that place, the Asgard, was where the Asgard, that building is, was the harbour master's, the harbour master for Westport. That was his office in Westport Quay. There was a lot of trade coming and going to Westport in those years, and so when they bought the place, that was what was they knew, they found it was the harbour master's office because of all the documentation they found in old boxes there. But we'll divert from that. We'll let that rest now for a moment. On Clare Island, we had a gentleman by the name of McCabe. We had policemen on Clare Island many years ago, which we don't have now, of course, and they were what I call RIC men. And old McCabe, who was the shopkeeper he came as an RIC man to Clare Island, and he got married to the woman that owned the post office and the shop there. And she's a lovely, lovely lady. I'll always remember old Mrs. McCabe, Sheila McCabe. She was one of nature's beautiful people. And they got married, and of course they had a family. But he was, as I said, a policeman. But he took over the running of the shop from his good wife at that time. And he was having difficulty in getting all the supplies from Runa into Clare Island, because in those years when I started with my dad, it was the only access to Clare Island was from Runa, and it was by curragh and by sailing boat. And in those days, you know, you had to bring all the supplies, and there was a good couple of hundred people living on Clare Island at that time, and there was a fair bit of trade coming and going. That all had to be handled in curraghs and in sailing boats. I wish I had a pound for every time I rowed across Runa to Clare Island, but however, it was very hard to get stuff in without getting it dressed and blessed with salt water and sailing along with the wind and the sea. But McCabe was in dire straits about this, getting his supplies in. And across in Achill, again, diverting a little bit, across from in Achill there was another gentleman who had a big shop in Achill, in Curragh. And he decided he was having the same difficulty in getting his supplies from Westport that time down to Curragh, because there was little or no transport. And leading up to the war, the very years of the war, nobody could get petrol for trucks or for cars or for anything. So it was nearly horse and cart, literally, between Westport and Curragh. But Johnny Gallagher had decided that he would buy a big trawler, and he'd sail from Curragh up to Westport Quay to collect all his supplies from the wholesalers in Westport and bring it down by boat to Corran. And he thought of an idea. He says, I'll ask Johnny Gallagher if he would take my supplies with him from Westport to Clare Island and drop them onto Clare Island before he goes back to Corran. And Johnny decided, yeah, I'll do that for you. So it became via Westport, Clare Island, Corran, just the way every month they got their supplies in. And of course the transport of Guinness and all that sort of stuff was a big part of the cargo between the two islands, or between the two lands in those days. But Johnny had two skippers on his boat, for his boat. Whenever one was sick, there was another one there. The boat used to go out fishing, of course, as well. So one of the skippers, of course, was a lot of Acklemen, of course, like a lot of Acklemen, a lot of Clare, and they loved their pint of Guinness. And the story goes then, coming back to the Westport, the two lads in Westport, John and Stevens and Tad. When they were going through old boxes in their building, getting it ready for the restaurant and for the bar, they found documents, and they found a letter in one of the boxes, which said that if from Mr. McCabe to the station, out to the harbour master in Westport, in the quay, and it said, if such and such a skipper is on O'Malley's, or is on Gallagher's boat carrying the supplies any time between Westport and Clare Island, make sure that you don't put the barrels of Guinness on the boat. Because the skipper in question, of course, you can imagine, being put in his place, he'd be sitting up at the wheel in the cabin and he'd be looking down and his tongue would be hanging out for a pint of Guinness. And he was wondering, how the hell can I get a pint of Guinness out of these barrels, you know? So McCabe, being the astute businessman that he was, his son was PJ, he insisted that PJ would check how many pints of Guinness was coming out of the barrel. That would give you an idea now about the kind of a man McCabe. He was a lovable character, a great character. I grew up beside him and next door to him, and he was one of those characters you would never forget. But PJ discovered that some of the barrels of Guinness produced about 10 or 12 pints less than it should, and he got in touch with Guinnesses, and Guinnesses said about this complaint to Guinness, and Guinness said, no circumstance, no way, that couldn't happen. That couldn't happen. So he said, no, and how is it happening? But anyway, he was a bit of a detective as well as being a businessman, the same McCabe, and he got PJ to examine all the barrels, make sure that you examine all the barrels to see if there's anything like a hole in the barrels, and there was no hole in the barrels. But they were all wooden barrels in those days, you know, the Guinness barrels were a ton weight empty without ever any Guinness in them, and they all carried about 10 gallons of Guinness. So I think there'd be 80 pints, as far as I remember, there'd be about 8 pints to the gallon or something like that. But anyway, he discovered that the hoops on the barrels at the time were that wide, and your man, of course, in his brain of excitement, trying to figure out how he was going to get a pint of Guinness out of the barrels, decided to get a hammer and a chisel, and he tapped the hoop up of the barrel, and he hit his drill, and he drilled a nice little hole underneath the hoop, underneath the hoop, and he had his peg of timber pared and designed like a pencil to stick in, and he drained out his couple of gallons of Guinness out of every barrel, and he had a supply of Guinness for months, never mind days. He had a fresh supply, and he was very anxious to get skipping on the boat from Corran and actually to Corran after that. But it was one of those lovely old stories, and McCabe finally discovered how he got it. So he got the chisel mark on the hoop where it was tapped up, and he tapped the hoop down into place again. But that's one of the lovely old stories from years gone by in the days that were when I grew up on the island, but it was part and package. There's a lot of other little stories in the book about life saving and all that kind of thing on the island, and around between the island and the mainland, and how we were struggling to get to and from. I remember bringing my sister out in a curragh. On one occasion, 2 of us rowing, and my mother, God love her, and my sister with appendicitis. She had to be operated on, and there got my mother out in a very nearly in the latter stages of her life when she lost all her blood. And it was a tough time looking back on those years. So it's a compilation of stories over 80 years up to the present time. That's what it is. And there could be a hell of a lot more in it, a hell of a lot more. So I try to keep it as small and as tidy as possible, you know. So it's here, and what a joy, and thanks so much. Thanks for everyone who's come, and it's lovely to see some from Galway, a very special friend from Galway, himself and Mary. And Mary sadly isn't with us, but she's having a cold, a bit of cold or flu or something like that, God love her. There's so many wonderful people that I met along the way that I could be writing for the next 2 months or 10 years about, you know. So it's one of those lovely stories. I just mentioned you just met Brigid there a few minutes ago. Brigid's husband that introduced me to my late wife, my dear Kay, God love her way back. And one of the times we spent out in the Asgard having a ball out there one night, and that's when I met Kay. So there's a lot of lovely stories in it, and of course my own wife, present day wife, I don't know where I'd be without her at the moment, and of course my family and all that. It's so good to be alive at this stage. I was alive 90 years of age, and you know, and particularly with the memories. The memories as fresh today as it was when I was 20 or 30, you know, maybe much more so. But that's a life story, you know, for what it's worth. And thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it will only take a little time to get through it. When I got it done, I wanted to get the writing to a nice size and everything like that. So she did a nice job on it. I give her great credit, Bridge, and down in Kerry, and we put a nice package of photographs together as well with it. So that's about it, and thank you once more. That's it.